Hi guys, I am here for part 4 of the Story of Atonement series, and in this episode I'm going to discuss HFW and go over a few things in regards to my endgame run. Now overall, this might have been the most fun that I've had wrestling, despite the ups and downs with the endgame run. But HFW overall, I had fun, despite, the circumstances with the drama and the coronavirus, COVID-19. All this drama. Despite that, between the HFW run and the Endgame run, this was my favorite as a wrestler. So ultimately, coming back to HFW resulted in me coming back full time, not only for the HFW run, but also the Endgame run. So around this time period, I was in school and I transferred back in May or June of 2019. I transferred to an actual college instead of the community college. And after my first semester and a half in, that's when COVID hit. So ultimately, I had nothing going on or whatnot. So that's one of the reasons why I joined HFW full time. And it took a bit of convincing at first, because I originally declined to start originally. And obviously, that's when COVID hit, the lockdowns and all that. It was not a great time. And there was a lot that happened with HFW. So, like, they might have, I don't remember the circumstances, but they actually, I believe, followed some guidelines because back in, where we live, they were very strict of how many people could be around each other because this whole coronavirus thing was happening. And I think it had a toll briefly to start out HFW, and it was just the start of a train wreck when it came to how HFW was ran. Um, but ultimately, I finally accept the offer to come in because of Medusa. Emma wanted me to join HFW finally, and I just said I will. Um, but one of my things was I wanted her to be one of my managers or whatnot. Because, throughout my history, I would love to have a manager, to help me win matches and all this stuff. So I wanted her to be my manager. And that was actually, I think, the plan anyways. Because she wanted to manage me. She was managing, I believe, Steven at the time along with Shane. But she wanted to manage me, I think. And overall, our chemistry worked a lot. It's just that when it came to managers throughout my career, I've had a terrible history when it comes to these managers. Though it did work for me on some positive occasions. So ultimately, I come a month early. So the idea for me to come into HFW is a bit strange and not really talked about. I was supposed to return in June of 2020. So this would have been the show after what would be Unsainted back in May. And I was essentially shoehorned last second into HFW. There was a lot that went on with the drama and people not showing up, and my return was abrupt. And we did some few teases with Medusa's newest client on camera, but my return was rushed because HFW was dying at the time, and they needed, people, to be on screen and, some people to rely on and all this kind of stuff, the typical stuff that when it comes to wrestling and trying to get people on camera and such. Essentially, in my opinion, my return was abrupt and was used as an emergency. I think, not saying that Steven and Billy panicked, but I think they did kind of panic because they kind of knew HFW was dying, so they kind of shoehorned me into a spot, which ultimately I won the World's Eyes contract in my return match, which is really odd considering that, I atoned for my sins as a Missionary 50 winning the Intercontinental title. And then out of nowhere, in my first match back, I win a contract to guarantee me a world title match, which is very strange. And you would think that I should, fight a few matches or build myself up to earn that spot. But again, with everything that was going on, they kind of shoehorned me into the match to win the contract, even though at the time I didn't deserve it. Personally, I don't know the specific reasons as to why I won the contract, besides it possibly being a panic move, even though I did not deserve it at the time. Ultimately, in HFW, Steven was the booker, so he could probably re-explain this to me in the comments, because personally, there was a lot that went on with HFW's issues that I essentially won the world's highest contract without earning it. So he could help me out when it comes to this whole situation, if he hears this, which I know he will. So I ended up winning the contract, and the idea was to have me run the World Heavyweight Championship. It would have happened around July or August, I think. And ultimately, I would have held it somewhere till, I think, the end of season, where ultimately I would have dropped the belt to Diablo. And we had this idea of doing a multi-match series. And I will get to that match in a few minutes, but that was what the idea was, where we would do 2-3 matches, to see like how this would go, because ultimately the first match we had was a success, which I'll talk about in a few. But I was back to having a manager, and I want to explain something to a lot of people, which was the height of my friendship relationship with Emma or whatnot. And Emma as Medusa, I know I'm going to, bury her towards the next episode, but you could tell from my Journeys video back then, she really meant a lot to me. It wasn't a good time, especially for everybody, COVID, lockdowns, everything's all messed up. And ultimately, I was going through rough times with a lot of people in my life when it comes to friendships, especially with a lot of women. So I used to have a lot of friends that were women, and ultimately I would end up dropping them due to, political reasons and some unfortunate stuff with me being drunk, around them and stuff like that. And back then, she was like the only person who would understand my frustrations and where I came from. And ultimately, she did something to me that I really appreciate when it comes to my friendships. And that's the amount of time and effort that she put in towards me. And that was something that I really appreciated. That was something I really loved. And since then, I've had, relationships, that happened in my life. Despite them failing and having to end the relationship and having to break up for whatnot that I had recently, for example, because I was in a relationship, but I did break up, with my ex. Unfortunately, we just decided to mutually part ways, but like, that's more different compared to Emma, because she gave me that platform, to kind of be myself and actually have fun with her on camera and develop our friendship on screen. And it worked. Our chemistry was unmatched. It could be cringe at times, not gonna lie, cringe and bad, but it was just her and I just being ourselves. And that's something overall that I really appreciated for her. It's unfortunate about some of the things that would happen later on, but back then, she really meant a lot to me. As a person and as a friend, I looked at her as a sister, and again, that's a lot of positive stuff that I can say about Emma. Can't say the same about what happens next. So, I do a few side matches to, build up or whatnot. So, I do a match with Lunatic. And again, panic move. Not many people on the roster. I end up ultimately having a match with Anthony to set up Death Watch, which was a authority angle. And he would have been like the boss. I would have been like the side guy or whatever you call it. And I think that might have been like a feud for the world title had we gone past Missionary 51. I don't remember exactly who I would have cashed in on. I think it might have been Diablo or Anthony when it came to who I would have cashed in on come, had we continued through HFW. And ultimately we formed that. It doesn't really go anywhere because Anthony's like not showing up because his girlfriend at the time would not let him wrestle. And ultimately I feud with Zero Assault going into the next main event, but ultimately he didn't show up till late to 51, so the match was completely canned. There was build up on screen, but the match didn't happen, and instead he got punished by Elias, which only had one match as Zenith. So ultimately, in terms of this feud we had with Zero Assault, the plan was for me to win this match. But again, it was canned last second because of him not showing until very late. And the other match that I want to mention is the match with Diablo. This one I thought was very strange. Because technically speaking, this would be the first time that Austin and I would have wrestled each other since the Missionary 40 Tag Team title match. And I don't include the Missionary 45 Royal Rumble when he was in the ring because what's crazy to think is him and I actually never got physical in the Royal Rumble match, which is very weird that it happened that way. So this was kind of weird to see how this would work because, again, this was also my first one-on-one match with Austin since Fallout 1 back in 2016. So it was very interesting to see how this would go, and I was not a fan of doing this match to start, but the only reason why it happened was because Steven wanted to experiment to see if this whole feud idea would work between Austin and I. And it's an underrated match. But in the end, we have a great match, which I'll talk about later on, where we exceed this match on the road to Endgame. And this was kind of an idea of to see how it worked, and I thought it worked for what it was worth. Ultimately, we did a double count out to protect both men. If I look back at it now, I think I should have lost that match because I think that would have helped Diablo a bit more around that time being the world champion, and I could have taken the loss personally. Because again, I didn't really lose in this run until Missionary 51, despite not having many matches. You know, ultimately, a lot of this winning comes into play when it comes to the endgame run, where I end up losing a lot, which we'll get to that in a second. So that happens, and then we get the news that Missionary 51 is going to abruptly be the last show of HFW. Ultimately, Billy pulled the plug on the whole entire thing, so we shoehorn all these matches together just to do. So, like, we do a match with me and Steven, which honestly was a letdown of a match. No fault of our own. It was kind of stuck in the middle of a situation where we got the news that we were going to end. So that ultimately went into this match with me and Steven, where people were more disappointed about us ending than paying attention to the match itself. So because of that, this match didn't really do any favors. Steven also didn't care. And I'm not saying that he cared about this match. He just didn't care about HFW ending because he was pretty frustrated about everything that was going on. Like, he wasn't happy with RJ because of the whole ladder issue and a lot of odds and ends, which I'm sure he'll discuss in his little future series of his. But there was a lot of issues going on in HFW, and it needed to end. I think a lot of people were pretty frustrated, much like all these other runs, back till like the end of 40 and, the end of season 1. This was a little different because it was during the pandemic. There was a lot of fights that happened. There were 2 unscripted fights at Unsated, which has never been done before and hasn't even ever been done since, where, Steven and RJ fight, and then Joe and Shane fight. So there was just a lot of tension going on, and I think they just wanted to wrap this whole thing up. So ultimately, we do that. We shoehorn me and Steven to an Atonement as the Atonement for this tag team title match because Anthony again no-showed in a very underrated match, except Shane sucked recording it. And then we do a abrupt match with me and Billy, and I'm not a really big fan of this match. I know Steven, I think, sees this one as the best me and Billy match, I think, between the 4 matches that we had between 2019 and 2020. I think he looks at this one as his favorite one, but it was just finisher kick out after finisher kick out. That's basically all it was. Like, I took like 6 or 7 awakened dreams for some reason and kicked out. I think personally, I wanted to make Billy earn it to beat me after all this time, but I was still going to, have Billy beat me regardless. But, like, I just think we just did a lot of finisher kickouts. Billy didn't care up to this point. I just think there wasn't a story to this match, which I think takes a factor away from this match. Between that and Billy's passion, you could just see it on screen. It's just that I just don't think Billy was really invested in this match, and that's just my personal opinion, despite it being very good. And, besides the finisher kickouts and all that, I just don't think Billy really cared for it. He was already done by that point. And then to cash into Obelisk. And ultimately, I lose and fail to cash in on Obelisk to end HFW, so I became the first person to fail a cash in, which sucked. I was fine with it though. It's just that I wish that me and Chippy had a little short match in between that. Would have been pretty cool, but I understood the timing of putting Chippy over and how important that was to him, because ultimately it would be his first and only world championship that Chippy would ever win. So that was basically Chippy's ultimate moment, but it's unfortunate that it happened at 51 where, people just didn't really care on the roster that we were ending, because we had a lot of mixed emotions. Some of us were upset and some of us were mad that we were ending, but HFW was just HFW overall failed as a company. There was just a lot that happened behind the scenes, more things to happen than most people realize with the drama overall and COVID. It was just it was not a very good time period. Though people still, people wanted us to come back or on the roster, like they wanted to wrestle, and that's why HFW was created. But at the same time, I think a lot of it has to do with COVID, and I think COVID, most people don't realize this, but I think COVID had a tremendous impact on our mental health. And I think that's a big stain as to why HFW failed, because of it was a very bad period for everybody, and not just us, but everybody in the entire country. And that was just a huge toll on everybody, along with the drama behind the scenes. So we get to Endgame, because again, I'm confirmed to do Endgame, and ultimately, before we even start this run, we had this idea of doing this whole revenge faction, which I forgot to write my notes, but I just pointed it out in my head. I pitched this idea with me, Greg, Elias, trying to think who else, Anthony, I think, I can't remember. I had this faction idea, or this revenge faction in mind, where we would kind of, I don't know the whole reasoning as to why we would all form, but it was just the idea that that I think we would go after the roster because of our frustrations with HFW, and how, for example, like Scorpion, I should have been the world champion, this kind of stuff, and kind of go after everybody that we blame, for example. I think, and some authority, storyline as well. I can't remember the numbers on top of my head, but those were some of the people that we had in mind for it. But ultimately, Steven tells me that we need to take a step back with me. And I realized it myself that I needed to take a step back. And by that, I mean lose. Excuse me. I had to lose more. I get the whole atonement for the sins run and all that, or the atoning for my sins. I won a lot, like how I mentioned. It was nothing but self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you look at my record between Missionary 45 up until Missionary 51, I hardly lost. Like, the only times that you could see me lose would have been like with Anthony, Shane, Chris, Billy, the tag match where I wasn't even pinned, Ed. Like, there wasn't many matches that you saw me losing within that 2 or 3 year stretch. And I think Steven realized that it was time to tone me back a little bit, which I was fine with. Though there were some issues that went along the way. So there were a few matches that I'm going to talk about. Because again, I don't think I'm going to necessarily talk about Endgame as much specifically, because I've already talked about it in my previous video from a few years ago. I will put that video in the link in the description below, because again, most of my opinions haven't really changed from Endgame, though there are a few odds and ends that I may add to this one. So again, like the Junkyard Brawl we have with me and Leatherface, unfortunately, I was not in good shape. And again, I stopped working out at the time. And again, that's some stuff was going on with the whole shutdown stuff, where you can only have a certain amount of people in an area at a time. I didn't like the idea of wearing a face mask in the gym, so I just kind of let go of the gym, and I've lost a lot of motivation to get myself in good shape, because I was in very good shape between like Missionary 50 and Missionary 51. But again, I wasn't working out, and that took a bad toll. And there was a spot in the match which I'm not really super on the Junkyard Bra, though it was still a good match. There was a spot that I was not expecting, and Steven hits me with a black hole slam on a piece of shed roof or whatnot, and I wasn't expecting it. I took it, but I wasn't expecting it, so I didn't know how to react, whatnot. But my back, I got the wind knocked out of me from that spot, and after that happened, I was pretty much gone for the rest of the match. You could just tell I was not in a right state of mind. Um, and at the time too, I was going through some back issues, and ultimately, the back issues would ultimately cost me after Endgame. And this was the first step of it that I knew something was wrong. So I then have, Medusa turns on me, and we do all that stuff where she joins the Atonement and gets kidnapped and all this stuff. And I go on to have a good match with Nick in January. You could tell, like, we like each other, but it looked like it was personal when you look at the match and how we were, like, fighting. It was more of a fight than a wrestling match, but it came off so good. Again, you know how I feel about Nick. Wrestling Nick made me a nervous wreck, though sometimes he could be a hit or miss when it comes to wrestling him. Despite him sometimes being reckless and sometimes not being reckless, but in this case, it all worked out. It was great to do that match with Nick, which we had an idea. I think he was going to do the page tap out move to me to end the match, but I don't know if he forgot or something like that, or if it was something to do in my back during that time period. I can't remember, but I pitched the idea of me tapping out to my own submission hold, which I think helped Nick a lot in this time period to, make Scorpion tap out to his own submission hold. That's never happened before on camera. So I pitched that, and it was great. But again, that was the first match that I needed to lose and take that step back for everybody else because I needed to lose more. And at the same time, my motivation wasn't there at the time. So we did a tag team title match, and it made no sense at the time. It was me and Anthony versus the Masked Militia, so Leatherface and Nick. And there was a spot in the match where Steven choke slams me, and ultimately Nick puts a sharpshooter hold on me. I don't remember how far back he went with it, but as soon as he went and sat on my back literally just gave out, and I ended up tapping out. I got pissed off because I didn't want that to be the end of the match, and my back was just out of it. But at the same time, that wasn't the only reason why I was pissed about this match. I never mentioned this in the last video, but I think Nick was shooting on me, and here's why. And I know Steven doesn't really believe me when it comes to this, and I don't even think I mentioned this to him before on camera or in person, but I kind of have a theory about this. And it can sound as like I'm delusional, but this is just my personal opinion. I think Nick was shooting on me in this match because of Emma. For example, there was a spot in the match where I tried to go for a super kick, and all of a sudden Nick just like tries to like grab my leg and all this stuff. It's like he wasn't allowing me to get offense in this match. I don't know why, but it was kind of, pissing me off, and then ultimately ended up with me tapping out. But no, I think when it came to certain situations in the match, I think Nick was shooting on me because I think it had something to do with Emma. And it has a lot to do with my personal relationship with Emma at the time. Nick and Emma were close. And I think Emma was saying some things to Nick. I feel like I think Nick used that as a way to kind of take some shots at me when it came to some parts of this match, because I wasn't happy with Emma's relationship at the time. She got with a guy where supposedly he was a drug addict, and it was something that I was not happy with her about back in December. And she knew at the time I didn't like that. And ultimately, I said some things off screen or whatnot, and I think she caught a wind of it. Steven was upset with me at the time where I just need to move on from it. And again, I think a lot of people were pretty upset about this whole thing. I think I was the most upset because she was saying things to me, for example, where she would tell me, something and then ultimately do the complete opposite, therefore lying to me in front of my face. I think I've said some things, and ultimately I think she used Nick as an example to kind of use that as a way to kind of shoot on me without directly telling me myself. And I know that's sounds delusional of me to think about, but it's just a theory of mine, which is something I don't hold Nick against. And it didn't really make sense because I think Nick also wanted Emma to be his manager at the time. And I think there was just a lot of frustrations with me with Emma back then because of this whole relationship thing. And I think Nick kind of used that as a way to teach me a lesson because of probably what Emma said to him or something like that. Because they were somewhat close to back then. Because I know the one time, I know for a fact that there was a party, I think, that Emma had with, all the boys and including the boyfriend at the time. And I don't remember what happened. I can't remember if I had something going on that day, but I never showed up or I didn't go. And I think some of it stemmed with that. And I think some people looked at it as me wanting to have a relationship with Emma. And I did have feelings for her back in the day, though they only lasted for during the summer of 2020. Ultimately, I started losing feelings for her. It's just a matter of her lying to me about certain situations where I think a lot of it had to do with stuff back in the day. So I just think overall, I think all of that in consideration, I think Nick was cheating on me in this match partially, and I'm not saying the entirety of the match, just because of personal issues in relation to my feelings towards Emma back then. Do I think it was... Am I mad about it? No, I'm not. Because again, I don't give a shit about Emma anymore. She did a lot of bad for me after all these years. And that's going to be something that I talk about in the next episode. But this was kind of a sign that I should have saw coming. And it's unfortunate that, I let this whole friendship between Emma and I continue once this whole thing happened the first time. But back then, we wanted her around. Everybody liked her around. And she was very good on camera. But back then, I kind of let my personal feelings get in my way because I was upset with her about lying and getting with someone that was actually not a very good person. So that's kind of why that all happened. Not much else happens throughout the Endgame run besides one of the things that I've talked about. So there are a few matches that I want to talk about that I really enjoyed, and that's pretty much all I'm going to do when it comes to the Endgame run. So I have a list here, and there are a few matches that I want to talk about. Because again, I don't really have to talk about much because, I end up losing more and such up until the Mass Militia run, which I end up winning a bit more after earning it. But ultimately, I did enjoy the Endgame run despite the ups and downs. And being able to win, 2 world titles in the process, and for the first time since 2016, it really made me happy winning the CWA and the HFW world titles. I've always wanted to win the HFW world titles specifically because we weren't able to pull that off back at, HFW. So to win it here on the road to Endgame, it made me so happy. Even though I was technically not the top guy at PGW, but the top guy representing HFW, it made me happy because that's what I felt like I was destined for, to kind of help HFW back then, even though under these circumstances, it just never ended up happening. So besides the Leatherface and Cryptic matches from January and December or whatnot, I want to bring up 2 matches that I very much enjoyed out of my run. And that is the 2 triple threat matches that I had with J-Pain and Mysterion. I loved wrestling RJ, and I hope he sees this. I absolutely loved wrestling RJ looking back at it. I made a list, and I had him closer towards, the bottom. But, after rewatching some of his matches with me or whatnot, I don't give RJ enough credit than, he deserves for these matches I had. Obviously the first match was okay, but I thought we did so much better when it came to, the other matches we had one-on-one moving forward. But the matches that catch my eye when it comes with RJ are these 2 triple threat matches. So the first one was somewhere around when I was losing, and we wrestled the fuck out of each other in the snow. It was probably the best quick triple threat match probably ever. Steven was marking out on camera. It was fucking fun. I enjoyed this match. RJ and I smacked heads on the snow. I don't know why I thought doing a kill switch on a snow mount was a good idea. The Germans landing on the heads, the super kicks. Joe wearing Mysterio wearing a mask on camera for no reason. It was great. Another good match that I liked from that was the second triple threat match. So this would have been the one where I won the CWA World Championship. Again, the first 10 minutes were not great, but it just turned into a very funny and entertaining match after that. And ultimately, I win my first World Championship since 2016. And then we get to the match with Beers, and it's the I Quit match. It was the best match that Steven and I have ever done up until Missionary 54. And ultimately, I ended up saying I quit because of Steven about to punt Emma's head off or whatnot. And in terms of the storytelling, that's why this match is so good. The match with Leatherface, not the Buried Alive, but the first one, which was a singles match back in March before I won the CWA World title. Again, very underrated match. And finally, Leatherface beats Scorpion. After many times, or tries, he finally wins. Not only does he win this match, but he also wins the Buried Alive match. But before that, I want to get into the match with Greg. This match with Greg, again, underrated. We did better than better than the first match back in 2019, and Greg and I clicked. I loved wrestling Greg as Maniac. He's fun to wrestle, except when he's a crybaby with script. Though overall, I love this match with Greg. And then we get to the Buried Alive match, which in my opinion is my best match. I briefly thought my match with Steven at Missionary 54 was my new best match. But after a while, and after dissecting everything throughout the past 6 months, my opinion on the Buried Alive match is honestly still the same now. Looking back at it, I kind of look at it better than the match with me and Steven at 54, which I'll go more into detail about that once I get to the last episode of this. But it's mainly because people talk more about the Buried Alive match than the match at Missionary 54. And I'll just say off the bat now to kind of give you an idea of why I think this match is my best match of my career instead of 54. More people talk about this match. And not only that, I think personally, I don't think many people really cared as much about me winning the world title, the PGW one at Missionary 54's main event. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. It's just the fact that the show was a day before the 10 years show, which ultimately there's a lot of matches that kind of overshadow the majority of the matches of 54. And again, no fault of anybody's own because 55 was the bigger show, but you have all these great matches that kind of overshadowed that whole story despite it being a very great match and a great story. Because, you had Shane and Austin, in my opinion, is the greatest match of all time besides the Steven and Austin match from September of 22. I just think with the 10-year show being the day after 54, I think the match between Steven kind of gets lost in a shuffle there because of all those matches that happened the next day. Again, that's just my personal opinion, but this match, the Buried Alive match, holds up so good still to this day. People still talk about it, and we're coming up on the 4-year anniversary of it, which is absolutely nuts to say, and the storytelling in this match is essentially crucial. It was the last time that Steven and I were ever on that property of his granddad's and my uncle's, and going to my granddad's all the time, I'm always seeing the house up there and the stuff that they're doing around it, since, I won't explain everything that's going on up there, but, it makes you think, wow, lots of great memories here, and the last memory that I'm going to have up there is having a random match on the property, getting buried alive. This match was special, and again, I can never say anything bad about this match. I have nothing bad to say about it, but to thank Steven for it. Unfortunately, Emma's a part of this match, but again, that doesn't matter and doesn't take away from the story because the story writes itself. So it's up there in probably the top 5 best matches during that Endgame run. And in my opinion, it's in the top 10 of all time in terms of matches. And then we get to the Classic 3. And by that, I mean back-to-back-to-back matches that I had back during the Mass Militia run. The match where I dropped the HFW World title to Shane, or Zero Assault. Great match. Fantastic. I almost concussed myself from a Hakai where I don't know why I thought him doing that flippy shit outside the ring was a good idea. Because technically he's taking a bump by flipping, but ultimately he lands on my head in the process. So that's the catalyst of the next two matches. So I then have an I Quit match with Anthony, which is absolutely amazing. And I end up saying I quit. I almost run the guy over and, trying to target this guy's neck. But ultimately, Anthony prevails to get himself to the main event of Endgame. And then we get to the match of Austin, or Diablo, which I spoke of earlier. This was fantastic. It's unfortunate, though, that this sidelined Austin for the rest of his run for Endgame, but there was so much to happen in the match. I was that little wuss that was afraid, and Austin kept going and going. I tap out, which I actually wanted to tap out so he could say he could actually technically beat me. Then ultimately Shane cost Austin a match, and I end up retaining. But at the end, he attacks me after the match and all that stuff, and I'm still scared, on camera. And I think after this match, and this is really important in my opinion, you know how I've mentioned how I lost a lot of respect for Austin between, the winter of 2016 up to Missionary 40. This was the moment that Austin and I think personally, I feel like we finally earned that respect of one another. And we've been good buds since. And again, it's something I didn't really mention in the second episode, but Austin's grown as a person. And I've said that about a lot of people, including Daniel, despite my personal feelings. Austin's grown. And I've seen him evolve of how he treats people and the people that he loves. And he's just a very good guy that realizes that there are some things that he wishes that he, didn't make mistakes with. But in the end, he made up for those mistakes off screen. And he's shown, including myself, that we've changed. We've grown up. And he is so funny to be around. He's such a cool dude. One funny story that we had, we made a joke in the mall restroom, and I love the story so much. Steven's recording in the bathroom stall at the mall, and literally, I'm like, yeah, I can see you taking a piss, Austin. And all of a sudden, Austin turns himself around in front towards the thing where I was, and literally flashes his stick at my face in a public restroom, and I literally fall over against the wall on the bathroom floor in the mall crying, like laughing. I don't know why, but that was fucking hilarious. Like, we just have this great bond. It's unique. I wish I could see Austin more often, but we're all adults now, so it's a bit tougher to see everybody. And he is, in my opinion, one of the greatest of all time to do this. And to have this match of Austin on our resumes, it says a lot. And it's one of the most unexpected matches that people would think that it would suck and the chemistries would not mesh up. But it did, and it worked. And that's why this match was fantastic. I just wish this match, or we had more matches together in HFW. So that's how I feel about that. And ultimately, I have other great matches. So I do want to give a few shout outs to some other people. So I did mention Mysterio on the J-Pain. I also want to mention Z-Money, JR Superstar, and honestly, I'll mention Obelisk too. Great matches that we had, despite some of them, especially with Mysterio with that last man standing match not delivering. They were good matches. I enjoyed wrestling JR Superstar, whereas most people didn't. I enjoyed wrestling Z-Money, despite me being not really fond of not winning the Royal title at Endgame. I still felt very happy to losing to Z-Money at Endgame, which leads us to Endgame, where ultimately I lose to Beerus and get chipped out of the Proving Grounds. Which, honestly, looking back at it, we kind of think about it as a disrespect to the character, but I personally liked it just because it's like you're shipping Scorpion back to the burial grounds where he was buried. So in script, you're thinking Beerus just sent Scorpion back to be buried alive. This kind of, attitude or whatnot. So, again, after going through, the Endgame run, ultimately, a week after Endgame, my back finally gives out. So after all the stuff that happened during the Endgame run with me wrestling full time, the moment I had with Nick with the sharpshooter, the black hole slam I had with Leatherface, and along with a lot of, crazy stuff that I did during the run, I got a little more extreme during this run. Pretty more than I was used to doing, especially back in CWA. Again, it was my first time getting, that physical with, weapons and, bumps and all that since, CWA. Um, but ultimately, it took a toll on my back. So I did a lot of work to make sure Endgame succeeded. And am I upset that I didn't main event Endgame? No, I'm not. I didn't want that spot. I thought it belonged to a lot of other guys, and especially from the whole 40 stuff, I didn't think if it was our last time doing this, I didn't think I was worthy enough being the last match. And I'm glad it was a triple threat match. It was the first time ever match, and it worked the way it should have. But ultimately, if I was thrown into that match as a fatal four-way, what would be the point? Because I likely would have been the first person eliminated, because I was basically Shane's little, trooper or whatnot. So I probably would have to, lay down, to make sure, in script, Zero Salt wins the World Championship. So I'm glad it didn't work out that way, and I ended up having the match with Beers, and that's that. So no, I'm not upset that I didn't main event Endgame, because I never wanted it, despite there being ideas of me being thrown into the match. I was happy it didn't turn out that way. So after all that, my back finally gives out, like I mentioned, and I thought I had a herniated disc or whatnot on my back, but ultimately it was just a pinched nerve, and ultimately this whole pinched nerve would last me for another 2 or 3 years up to that point, and I still deal with these issues to this day. But the one thing that saved me moving forward, and I want to point this out right now, is the fact that I'm really good when it comes to storytelling. A lot of these guys, like, Shane, ultimately, Austin and Steven and JJ, Jester. I can't remember if we called him JJ or not. I haven't seen Jester in such a long time. I don't even know how I'm forgetting his name already, but I'll just say Jester. They helped me get through, ultimately, my last matches. And ultimately, not only do they carry me, but my storylines also saved those matches, which we will start off with the match with Shane in the next episode, where it was supposed to be Malik, but ultimately a lot of stuff happened back then. So ultimately, I don't wrestle, and I could have, but I didn't. And the only reason why I didn't for like Missionary 52 or whatnot was as a precaution. I didn't want to risk myself again at the time, even if it was just brief. And back between after Endgame and 55, my family did not know I was wrestling. I actually kind of hid it from them. I don't know how I pulled it off, but that's what happened. So I returned as a general manager, which is pretty weird because it's like I'm just being me now. I'm not like this whole wrestler. It's just Josh. Josh the GM. That's all it was. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, and this was very interesting to me because I always like to think about this, especially since how my Endgame run ended, is how do I think I would have booked myself if I wrestled Missionary 52? And I think I have an answer for that. I don't know if Steven and I will kind of see this or not, but the way I look at it is you have to go back to defeat with Steven for Missionary 52. Whether I win or lose that, I think that's the route it would have to go. And if I don't think necessarily I would wrestle before 52, but I think that's the match that would need to take place. And I think the match would have to happen before the match where he wins the Origins title. So I'm guessing in this scenario, I probably would have to win. I'm not sure. I probably wouldn't. Not sure either. But despite that, I think obviously that's the match that you have to do if I'm wrestling, Missionary 52. And ultimately, after that, in my opinion, and this is just me fantasizing here, I'm not saying that it should have happened, but I think I should have feuded with RJ for the world title. So after you do the whole thing with Steven and Missionary 52, I think being the guy to feud with RJ for his world title run, I think would have done very good for RJ. And I think RJ and I could have done some good matches. And ultimately, in the end, RJ would win the feud before he ultimately drops the world title to Leatherface. So then from there, who knows? Maybe you finally get to do the matches with Malik and Jester, you know, towards the tournament and, Missionary 53. But overall, the way I see my booking is you do the match with Steven at 52, and then you lose the world title feud to RJ. Because I think RJ, looking back at it too, I think RJ should have got at least another win over me on the road to Endgame. Because ultimately, him and I had technically 4 singles matches against each other on the road to Endgame, where in the first match he wins clean. Then we have the tie in the second one. And then the last 2, I win those via BS. I think it would have been nice to give RJ that rubber one on. He was actually planned for me to wrestle when I returned to HFW, but that was canned once the whole situation with Steven happened back in Unsated. So overall, that's kind of where I see my booking after Endgame if I were to wrestle Missionary 52. So that's where this whole episode ends. And again, I didn't really talk much about Endgame because there's just so much to cover, but just click the link in the description below. Outside of me believing Nick was shitting on me because of the whole Emma situation, honestly, besides that, nothing else in my opinion has really changed about this run. Again, great run. The Buried Alive match was my greatest match of my career. A lot of stuff happened with me winning the 2 world titles and having some banger 5-star matches. So, and unfortunately, the HFW thing, which again, I wish more came out of it, but again, things happen in this world despite the circumstances. So, the next episode is probably going to be my favorite episode to do. It's going to talk about, I believe, Missionary 52 to Missionary 53. It's probably going to be the shorter episodes moving forward between this one and AWTP's episode. I was going to combine them into one, but I think looking at it now, I think I'm going to combine them into 2 separate episodes. So you're going to get 2 more episodes rather than just 1 more. So next episode will be 52 to 53, and then AWTP will be the finale of this. And ultimately, what I'm going to cover in this episode is going to be interesting, talking about me being the ultimate GM and ultimately the match with me and Malik being canned due to his injury and why the match with Shane took place. And ultimately, the one thing I'm looking forward to is talking about Medusa's departure. And ultimately, a lot of that stems back to when I mentioned the whole shoot thing with Nick and me being unhappy with some stuff that was going on with Emma back during the Endgame run. Ultimately, a lot of that has a factor in terms of why her departure happened. And again, it's unfortunate that this all happened, and it destroyed me. That's all I'm going to say. But ultimately, in the next episode, Medusa's departure will be discussed, and I have nothing but bad things to say about her, unfortunately, despite how much she meant to me back in the day. So that'll be the next episode, and then it'll, the ending of it will be the segment with me and Malik from 53. So thank you guys for watching, and I'm in my PJs, obviously, because I'm doing this late at night. So that's why I'm dressed up like this. So I'm glad I was able to cover Endgame and HFW, and I'm looking forward to covering the whole GM run despite, some of these negative circumstances. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next episode of the Story of Atonement.